I live in the imposter's body more than I live in my own body. When you get good news and you're like, when are they going to figure this out? You start to do all that talk to yourself. And that's when you get pulled into the sort of imposter syndrome, instead of really saying, I got this because I am who I am. I deserve this. I worked hard for it. And I am just who I am. I'm in the right place at the right time. There are so many reasons I don't have to feel like I don't deserve this.
It all begins by understanding the mind.
I want to be happy now. I don't care about the future. I want to be happy right now.
You are not alone. You are never, ever, ever alone in this.
It's helped my voice grow and given me freedom to be creative on my own.
I'm Christina Barcy. Welcome to Be Bold, Begin, a podcast dedicated to you, the creative, the healer, and the innovator. The topics and conversations we have here are designed to help you discover what might be getting in your way and offer you tools, techniques, and guidance to move through them.
I live in the imposter's body more than I live in my own body. I don't have to feel like I don't deserve this.
This is where creativity and healing intersect.
If you decide to be bold and begin, you have the opportunity to feel humbled and empowered. I totally believe that.
I'm a certified Kaizen Muse creativity coach, a certified Reiki energy healer, and an entrepreneur, artist, and presenter. I will share with you my experiences, my proven tools and techniques that helped me and my clients and loved ones shift and expand in the areas they most desired. This is a gentle and open space where you will hear how others are being bold to encourage you to begin your own journey or expand the one you're on. This is Be Bold Begin. Hi there, this is Barcy, your host, and this collection of episodes that I'm resharing with you is part of the Intuitive Creators series, in which I am wanting to highlight tools and mindset that will help you get to your next version of your desired self, as well as some obstacles that you may experience. So like in this episode, which features my good friend and TV writer Greg Locklear on the subject of imposter syndrome. So this topic is interesting because it's a good example of the ongoingness of a growth journey, meaning imposter syndrome honestly can really happen at any time of the journey, and it can happen often or once in a while or at different stages. But I think it especially happens during times where we are stretching ourselves or challenging ourselves to step into that new version of where we're trying to get to or what we're trying to achieve or something that we want to add to who we are, how we show up. So much like how fear works, imposter syndrome is something that can be lessened in its intensity, and it can be there and not get in the way of your next steps. It cannot get in the way of your ability to show up. You're going to show up anyway. That is actually the goal. We are not trying to get rid of imposter syndrome, but instead we want to find and apply tools to continuously work with it. So here's my conversation with Greg Locklear on imposter syndrome. So I'm here with Greg Locklear, and we are in Silver Lake. We're on location, which doesn't happen anymore because of COVID. We all know that. But he's a very, very good friend of mine, and we're going to tell you all about that. And we're actually sitting in his brand new, would you call it an apartment?
This is a house.
You're
it's
in a
actually,
house.
Yeah, it's a house.
It's gorgeous. It's Spanish style, I'd say.
1920s.
1920s Spanish influence, Hollywood.
Yes.
We're in his bed.
It's got a lot of good energy.
So much
My
good
bed
energy.
and the house.
Yes. And you've only been here for 48 hours, correct?
48 hours, correct.
Which is, I feel so honored.
You are my first friend to be in this house.
I love that. Thank you for that. This moment has been amazing so far, and you guys are going to love this conversation. Greg and I met at my last day job, which was also, well, it wasn't your last day job, but it was the last type of day job you had, which was hospitality / restaurateuring, whatever we want to call that,
yes.
Serving. You also managed at a couple of restaurants after that, one of which I also worked at once, not at the same time, but we did grace some other grounds together separately in a weird way. So I will leave that restaurant nameless because That's a whole can of worms that we could get into for too long. But it was a place that kind of motivates you in a way that other places might not, because of the level of strain, stress, and physically, emotionally.
Yeah.
It's just something that everyone that works there that I've known, and it takes it on in a way that feels like you have to bring a different character to work,
Yes.
just as armor in order to get through it.
Yes.
And many people did that. And I remember you left before I did, and I remember the moments of you desperately needing to get out. It becomes this desperate thing for many of us.
I cried on the way to work every day for the last, probably 6 months. That's not a lie.
I know, you've said that to me many times.
My ex-husband would drive me to work sometimes, and I literally would cry in the car, and it would take probably about 20 minutes to a half hour for me to go in there, honestly.
Wow. Yep. It's one of those jobs, especially for people like artists, which many people who work in places like this are artists. And that's why we have these jobs, is so that we can do the art the other half of the day. But when you work at a place like this, there really isn't another half of the day.
No, it's like a third of the day, or like an eighth of the day, or
and you're
whatever.
dreading, you spend that whole eighth of the day dreading the thing, right? So that's the circumstances that we met under. And then there was that moment where you decided you had enough.
Yeah.
And you left.
I did.
And I think I was like, what are you going to do? And you're like, I'm going to write.
No.
You said, I'm going to write.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you also said, I don't know. But you said, but you were going to write.
I was like, I don't know. I think I'm going to write, but yeah.
Yeah.
I knew what I wanted to do.
I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm going to write. Yeah. And I was like, I don't even know what that feels. How do you do that?
Yeah.
How do you just go? I couldn't wrap my head around it. And what year was that? Do you remember?
Oh, God. That was probably 2014, I think. So about 6 years ago.
Wow. So I had just started there.
Yeah, did I train you?
Probably.
I feel like I trained you.
Probably. Yeah, at least one night. I think in the penthouse.
In the penthouse, and then we sat in
that'll give you some clue.
Dining room
where we worked.
Yeah, wink, wink. Los
Beverly
Angeles,
Hills.
the penthouse.
Okay. Yeah.
We were in the private dining room that was by the kitchen and doing our side work, and I think it was the first time you and I really connected. I don't know. I think you probably were also. I just recognized a kindred spirit in this industry because. I think we kind of started talking about this stuff right away, honestly.
I don't
remember what
that.
our specific conversation was, but we were like folding napkins or doing something very tedious. But what struck me with you, and it's sort of how I, survived that, was that you just showed up 100%. Like I would never have known. We talked about our dreams and our hopes, not in a way of we weren't resentful or lamenting about it. I think we both were just like, really building optimism together. And I think that struck me about you when we met. I don't remember specifically what we talked about, but I just remember where we were and how I felt about you. And then we started working together a lot. And so because we were working together so much and pooling our money, we talked, because that's what you get to do when you're standing at the side of the dining room watching everybody else enjoy their families or their whatever, their meals and conversations, and we got to have our personal time.
Yeah. Wow. It feels so distant in so many ways.
I know it does. It's 6 years ago. It feels like 16 years actually to me.
It kind of does.
I barely remember it.
I think between the two of us, we've made 16 years worth of transitions.
100%. I agree.
Especially
with that.
you traveled the world. Okay, let's talk about that a little bit, and then we're going to get into it. But because from there, so you left. I almost said the name of the restaurant. So you left that restaurant.
Yes.
And you went on to do some really amazing things, and you traveled the world a bit.
Yeah.
And you went to my home country.
Yeah.
to do some shooting. Can you remind me what position you had on? You were shooting Marco Polo.
Yes.
Which was a series on Netflix?
Yes, it was.
Yeah. And what was your position on that crew?
So I worked on season 2 of Marco Polo, and I was the director's assistant. So essentially, it was a huge deal, actually. And it was a position that a friend of mine had for the first season, and she was promoted to be an associate producer, and then, basically was like, hey, I need to fill this position. Do you want to do this? And at the time, again, I was hired to write a pilot, so I was writing a pilot for a producer. There are so many journeys that happen in between there, but when this happened, of course I was like, absolutely, because I love to travel, and I wanted to break into television.
And you were married at the time.
And I was married, yeah. So there were a lot of considerations, but the thing is, at the time, my ex-husband was very supportive of that for me. So, and it just, all of it made sense. It checked every box. It was an opportunity to work in television. It was taking the position of one of my best friends who had already built this great network of people on the show. She knew everybody knew her. So I was stepping into something that was already sort of golden for me.
Warm waters.
Yeah, warm waters, 100%. And, she gave me the deal on the directors. And so we had 4 directors. So basically my job was to go on location and assist the directors, which at the time I had no fucking clue what that meant. I had never worked on production. I had common sense about it. Mm-hmm. Sort of knew it, but you don't know really until you're like thrown into the fire. And then you're like, oh, it's a completely foreign language to me. So, I interviewed with the showrunner and one of the producers, and, honestly, I was honest about what my limitations were in my experience. I didn't try to, pretend to be something that I wasn't. I just related to them on a level of, these are my goals. This is what I've done so far. And, what I know is that coming from restauranting, you do get such good people skills and reading skills and intuition. It builds intuition. Yeah. You problem solve under pressure. All of the things that I learned in restaurants actually translated perfectly to production.
Yes, it does.
It does.
I've noticed that as well.
Totally.
It's completely layered into the life I've built for myself now. And it's so applicable. And I love those moments where I notice it's working for me.
Yes.
Because it's this thing we hated so much.
Yeah,
we talked about
100%.
To get
absolutely.
started. And it was really cool to see that. So I love that you just said that.
Yeah.
How did you just do it anyway, knowing that you felt like this was something you've never done before? It was a foreign language. What gave you that bravado to just go for it and know that you can do it and you'll figure it out?
That's a really good question, actually, because, there's a part of me and a side of me that's very afraid to do things. And there's a side of me that is gritty as hell and is just willing to take the adventure.
Yeah.
But because I was stepping into something, I trusted my friend. I liked the people that I met. I also went there looking to see if it was something I wanted to do. I probably would have taken it anyway, but if I'm being honest, but I liked them a lot, and they were a family.
So the environment helped make it feel safe?
It did, and the people too, because they were just saying the right things. I'm like, there's an intuition that I have about people, and we'll get into this probably a little bit later, but I originate this way. This is where I've grown to be as a human being, but also being in restaurants. There's a certain requirement of reading a table, reading people, having empathy, being humble. And I saw all these qualities in the people that I was talking to, especially in this interview, and was like, I really want to do this. And I love to travel, and I really wanted to get into television. I mean, that's my dream. So I said, hell yeah. Whatever happens, I'll figure it out. I know the journey's not going to be easy. I knew that. I was scared. I didn't speak Hungarian. You and I talked a little bit about culture, and I asked you a lot of questions, and I did a lot of research. I just did the things that were natural to me so that I could try to figure this out a little bit in advance, knowing full well, as we do in restaurants, you don't know what the night's going to bring. And you have to be ready for that.
But it also helps us to prepare as much as we can, just to feel like we have some sort of arsenal to pull from, knowing that we're probably going to have to throw all that away and do something completely different.
Totally. Maybe that night, maybe the next night, with the next, and even in restaurants with the next table, you're like, this table is one way, and then you get another table afterwards. So you just, you have to roll with the punches.
And the world we're living in now is a very good example of that, of the fact that, hey, you have the skills that you have, and you may have lived life a certain way for so long, but when circumstances change, you have to just roll with it and take what you have and apply it. And that's what it boils down to. So I want to clue people into what we're talking about today, because we're already touching on it. And so basically, I thought of you because after our restaurateur experience together, where we started to have those conversations a little bit, I don't feel like we really connected deeply until after you left, where I remember the last night when you were like, look, I'm going to listen. This is my first podcast that I created called Dimension when I had the sci-fi.
Yeah, totally.
And you were telling me about your documentary that you'd done, and you were like, I'm going to listen to it, and I want to talk to you after, and I want to have conversations with you. And that meant so much to me that you even remembered that I'd said that at any point, and that you were making a mental note to kind of circle back to me at some point and have a fun, creative conversation, or who knows, I didn't know what. And I thought that was so awesome. But people do things like that all the time in a way, and I'm like, okay, well, we'll see. But then you did. You showed up, and then I showed up, and we started hanging out. We started doing, we would go to what was it? We would go to Graffiti Cafe,
which doesn't exist anymore. It's
Sweet
Sweetgreens now, but whatever.
I know, and it was such a cool space. They had a fireplace, everything was white, there was a lot of artists there, it was very cool. But we would go meet up there, like the very cool people that we were at Graffiti, and also have these conversations. And the conversations we had was always about the creative process and our dreams, what we were trying to do. Like, I was still working at this restaurant at the time when we started talking, but we also talked about what it means to work in this city. And for us, that's Los Angeles, or to try to work. I was trying to work in that city, and I hadn't figured out how to do that and feel authentic. And I don't know if I used those words yet at the time, but
I feel like you probably did, honestly.
Maybe. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But I know that that's what I wanted. Yeah. And I didn't know how to get there. But talking to you was a nice start. You were really at the beginning.
I know, but I was just going to say that. It's so funny to me because even when in those beginning conversations, you coming at me that way, I'm so eager and willing to talk about these kinds of things because I love this. I love what I do. I love being creative. I love talking to other creative people. It fuels me. I have a passion for it. But I also am like, why the fuck are you coming to me about this? You know what I'm saying? I was like, I just started this. I don't know which end is up either yet. But
I loved that because you were very transparent. Like you said, even walking on set in Hungary, like you were like, I hadn't thought about it this way until you mentioned it, but I loved that you were like, I struggle with these things. And what I'm talking about, I keep dancing around it, but we're talking about imposter syndrome today and comparison and what it feels like to try to do the thing we know we're supposed to be doing, but somehow we still feel like we don't belong or we don't deserve it, or there's people doing it better.
Yes.
And so not to take, I want you to finish your sentence.
No, that's exactly it.
Before we continue with this conversation, there's something I want to share with you. So I've been creating this podcast now for over 4 years. And the one thing I think it's missing is an opportunity to connect with you and be a bigger part of your own bold, creative, and shifting journey. So whether you're a creative entrepreneur or want to be, or a wise wellness witch, which I am lovingly referring to as the coaches out there, healers, or just someone leading others in their wellness journey, that I made this interactive space for you. It's now newly called Intuitive Creators Academy and Collective, and you can join me there for free just by clicking the link in the show notes of where you're listening to this podcast. So just like this podcast, I want to help you shift into your highest self to own your message and become the intuitive, creative leader I know you can be in your own life and business, just like many of my guests have become. So now you may be just getting started, or you might be ready to elevate to your next level of mastery. But whatever stage you're in, there will be live events, webinars, workshops, and courses within the group to intuitively guide you closer to your highest self. When we intuitively create from clarity and our authenticity, we open the door to our expansion. And I also have a special gift for you as a listener of Be Bold Begin. If you click the link in the show notes to join the collective, I will also gift you a 20% discount on my brand new store, where I have personally designed unique wrap dresses, kimonos, purses, yoga mats. There are a few other things in there too. There are 2 collections. One is called Be Bold, obviously, and one is called I Am. So once you join, just DM me inside the Intuitive Creators Academy and Collective and say that you're a Be Bold Begin listener, and I will give you that 20% discount off one item of your choice from my store. So I cannot wait to meet you there, and I can't wait to join you on your journey.
I mean, it's funny because talking about Hungary, I remember my first night in Budapest. I went to my friend Allie's apartment. She was an associate producer. She was my friend who got bumped up, and she had a bunch of things on the table for me laid out, which was a schedule. I'd never seen a production schedule in my life, ever. And I look at it now and I'm like, whatever, I know what this is. I can read it backwards and forwards. I can make a production schedule now. But if any lay person were to look at a production schedule, it would look like, it would look like alien writing.
Talk about overwhelm.
Totally. And so when I arrive in Budapest that night, I get to the table and I'm like, what is this? And Allie, it's so funny because right when I arrived, she's like, oh, I'm so glad, just make yourself at home. And I remember her text, which was like, hey, so I left the production schedule on the table. You are not going to understand anything on it. Don't worry, you will. I'll explain it to you. You'll get it. Don't worry about it. And to our point about imposter syndrome, it was the moment where I'm like, why am I here? Who hired me to do this job? Why am I here? I have no idea how to do this job. I don't know how to do this job. I don't know anything about production, really. I thought I did. Turns out, I don't know a goddamn thing.
That's so scary.
It was scary. It was really scary on my first night. And it's not like taking a job in Los Angeles necessarily. We're shooting on location. This is a $100 million Netflix show with horses and costumes and period, and whether or not you liked Marco Polo, we had a big fan base, but whether or not you liked Marco Polo.
I watched it.
I loved it. And I ended up loving working on that season, and I have so many amazing memories and I learned so much, but at that moment I felt so overwhelmed and I felt like I didn't understand anything. And being in Budapest, everything being in Hungarian, and sure, people speak English, whatever, but it was just a sort of an assault, and I really didn't feel like I had earned where I was in that moment.
Do you remember you talking to me about that, about the need to earn it? And yes. I relate to that because I have realized that I quantify my worth with how much work I do, which is probably why I'm a little bit of a workaholic, because I'm trying to prove to myself there's no one else watching. Totally. I'm the most solo person in the universe in terms of work. Like, I'm just alone at home, like, doing my thing. But I'm now transitioning because I just hired an assistant, woohoo, and now there's someone witnessing. I have more witnesses now, not just her. She's fucking amazing. But there's other people witnessing my life, and I realized that no one was witnessing my life for a long time, but I was also just doing it for me. And that's a strange thing to do, to prove to myself my own worth through overworking, through trying to find value that way. Yes. And like feeling like you know, it bleeds into the what am I doing, and who's going to see it, and do I belong here, and how do I prove that I belong here, and there's other people doing it better, and
when will they find out that I don't belong here?
Yeah,
That's
when will they figure it out? When will they
lingering
figure it
over my
out
head.
that I'm a fucking hoax? Yeah, like when will they figure it out? And who's it going to be? What's going to happen then? Like,
and you spend time waiting for that, actually.
yeah, it's that anxiety, right? Of like, when are they going to figure it out?
I don't necessarily feel like that echo has left my life at all. I don't know that it ever will, honestly, but it's a different thing now for me than it was then, honestly. I mean, at that time I was just so excited too, on top of it, but eventually, production's hard. Production is long hours. It's a lot of opinions, a lot of egos, and you really have to read people, like, to a T. So again, getting back to the restaurant background, I was like, I had a leg up in that regard, but still I wanted to prove myself, and I wanted to feel a certain way, but then I also wanted to, you know, keep my cover. Because I was just like, you're paying me this money, and you're paying for my food and my apartment, and you paid for my plane ticket, and you're about to fly me to Malaysia to shoot the second half of the season and put me up there and do the whole thing. And I just, you know, you feel like a year ago I was struggling. A year ago I was waiting tables. A year ago I was wearing, you know, a white jacket and a black bow tie and waiting on celebrities and, you know, witnessing that life that I coveted as well.
So were you afraid to let them know that that was your life before, or?
No. What I found was that almost every creative person has that story. There are a few that don't. This is a generalization, but so
we're in
many
Los Angeles.
people in this city and in this industry have that story. Everybody understands what it's like to have a survival job.
Yeah.
And to pay the bills and to get put down because you want to pursue something that's creative and artistic, and you're not a lawyer, you're not a doctor, you're not, you know, all the things that,
and
you know, I was told.
sometimes those things are the jobs that the people have that want to be creative, you know?
Totally.
And, you know, for us...
And that's scary for them, too.
And,
still leaving that
I only bring
security.
that up because the restaurant world is a very LA thing for the people that work there are being creative. That's not necessarily everywhere.
Yes.
And not everyone who's listening is from Los Angeles. The majority are, but not everyone.
Right.
There's a lot of people from other states and some people in other countries, but the reality is they could be doing whatever the day job is, whatever their parents wanted them to go to school for.
Yeah.
Or whatever they were good at, because we all are good at many things.
Yeah.
And then you go the safe route, right? So how do you break out of that? That's a whole nother podcast.
Yeah.
But okay, so I love this conversation, but we're going to get back to that. But I want to ask you how you identify.
As far as...
You can interpret that however you would like.
That's such a... How do I identify? I am a... It's so interesting because I would say I'm queer, firstly. I'm cisgender male, queer, gay. You know, it's such a fluid question, but I would say primarily I identify that way.
Do you identify as an artist?
I identify as an artist, as a creative, as a writer. Yeah.
Okay, as a writer.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's how I know you as well.
Primarily, but I think it trickles into other things for sure, and I have other fancies and things like that I don't like to discount necessarily, but primarily I would say, you know, I've wanted to be a TV writer for my entire life.
Okay.
It's the thing.
It's the thing. So tell me about that. Tell me about when that dream started for you and what it was like growing up for you. And I also want to know when you knew those identifiers. When did that happen for you? Did you always feel like you were queer? I don't know if that word existed when we were little yet. In the context it does now. Yeah,
it was probably a little more radical and sort of leftist at the time. I think in my opinion, it's a safer term now that sort of speaks to, I would have said I was gay 5 years ago, but I think my sexuality, and which informs my creativity, is more nuanced than that. So queer
So is
gives
that what it
me
means
a
for you?
bit of a more sort of more space to play in, actually, so I don't have to limit myself in my life or in my creative sort of pursuits,
I love that as a definition.
Yeah.
Because that was going to be my next question.
Yeah.
So great. I appreciate that. Yeah. So what was it like growing up? And when did you know that this was your dream and that you were queer?
Yeah. I mean, I've always known. I grew up in a small suburb of Philadelphia on the border of Delaware and Pennsylvania. And my town was very conservative, lots of veterans. It is a working class area. I mean, it's built up so much now into suburbia, but at the time it was just sort of building up. And my father grew up there as a child. My mother grew up there as a child. Their families are very blue collar, working class, military, some of my family members worked in refineries, and we grew up very sort of lower middle class. I never felt like that. I never felt a class distinction growing up, but I did feel persecution because the town that I grew up in was very Christian and very
Were you Christian?
homogenous.
Sorry to interrupt.
I grew up Catholic.
Okay.
Yes, but there were Christians, Catholics, everybody in the mix. But there was a lot of anti-Semitism, a lot of homophobia growing up, like overt homophobia growing up. Racism. It's a town where it's very segregated. There's a township that's right next door that is black, that it was struggling and poor, and the white neighborhood that I grew up in that was adjacent was very sort of rural and protected. Even though we were lower middle class, it was still very much delineated. And so there was always that awareness as well. And I knew that I was different, that I was gay, that I was queer from a very young age. I was very free in my expression of that. I was very femme. I was highly femme as a child. I did dance routines. I choreographed dance routines. I acted. I wrote poetry. I mean, and these are things that I'm assigning.
Sounds like you were just really creative.
I was. I'm assigning gender to it to prove a point, which is that's how I was regarded. The misogyny, it's actually misogyny in my mind looking back. I don't gender those things now, obviously, but at the time it felt very gendered to me, and I knew at a very young age that I shouldn't be doing those things because I'm a boy.
Wow.
So, and boys don't act that way. Boys play sports, and it's a very classic story, but that was my childhood. My dad was very much cisgender, white, even though he's not really white. My father's father is Native American, and our tribe, which is Lumbee, is a mixture of white, Euro, black, and Native American blood. So it's a really interesting story, the story of our family. But
I did not know that.
Yeah.
Explains your lovely bone structure.
Yeah. So, there were a lot of complications with that, as far as my relationship with my father. My father really defined manhood to me. He was very sort of classic jock, cisgender, white passing male. And he had me when he was very young. My parents were 20 when they had me. So they were very much caught in their lives and indoctrinated by their parents. Specifically my father. My mother's side was different, but there was a lot of racial trauma there and a lot of homophobia. But I do think that from a very young age, to get back to our topic, is I knew that I had to be somebody different than who I was because I was getting judged for it. I was getting abused for it. I was getting called out sometimes about it. I was humiliated by my father, by friends of my father and my mother, family members. I mean, everybody.
So really intimate relationships were calling you out.
Yes. Who also loved me in the same breath. So again, you have...
Which to them was probably their way of loving you in the moment.
Yes.
Not
trying to protect me from going down a certain path.
Right.
So when you're a young queer kid in that situation, which is the story, you sort of bifurcate. So you just become two people. You become the person that you have to present, who is going to keep you safe and, not raise any questions or conversations. And then you're who you are, which is, as you get older, you learn to secret away.
Wow.
Until you get into high school and you're a teenager, and then you're like, fuck you, or whatever, or you test those boundaries, or you find your tribe who allows you to engage that way.
So talk about impostering, right?
Yeah.
Really.
That's where it starts, I think.
Really
I think a lot of people have this story. I think, a lot of people can find some kind of pivot where they had to split into two. I mean, I think that even my father, for example, had to do that growing up. I think he had to, in order to escape abuse that was happening in his family, without getting into the backstory, he had to become a different person to protect himself than who he was. And we, as much as we come against each other and we have beef with each other, because we do right now, I think that's what he had to do to survive, and I understand that. So to the point of what you're trying to do here, I think that is something that follows you through life, and especially follows you into creative endeavors and career and avocation. To me, this is even more than a career, it's an avocation. I've suffered through so much to have this, to continue to have this, to continue to grow this, but that never goes away. That imposter never goes away.
So what does that mean to you when you say it never goes away? It's something that you have to work alongside, or how does that play out for you? Meaning that, so first I want to just point out that I think the experience is different for everyone, but it is a normal experience. And like you said, it's probably very relatable. I think we all have our version of our story this way. And some people might not even be aware that this is what it is. And there were definitely moments where I didn't know there was a word for this. It's like, oh, that's what that is that I'm feeling. So whatever stage people are at, and I think it fabricates in whatever way it does. And, there are moments where it goes away because you're busy working through, just doing the thing, right? Sometimes you have to just put it aside and get through it. But when you say that it doesn't necessarily go away, what does that mean for you?
I guess, God, it's interesting as it just touches on so much. But where I am right now, I'm in a place where I'm trying to make friends with my imposter a little bit, but I wasn't always there. I think it becomes a part of you because it happens in your most formative years. For me, it happened so young. I was probably like 3 or 4 when this really started happening, when I'm having conscious memories of literally splitting apart, right?
Yeah. To
survive, and hearing comments and all of that. So I think it becomes normal. And so, I live with it still every day, but I feel like now I've learned to, it's because I've done this kind of work. I've analyzed it. I've thought about it. I've meditated on it. I've talked about it with friends, with lovers, with my partner, with my family, even confronted some family members about it. So it's a part of it's always going to be a part of who I am.
So it's super rooted in your whole person, not just as a creative person, but in everything, all of it. You've had to do this. Sort of coming to terms or using it to your advantage for a while, right?
Sometimes, yeah, sometimes. And sometimes, it's like, I think, to our conversation earlier, when things start happening for you, when you get news, you got that job. It doesn't happen for me when I don't get the job, because the imposter part is the failure part in a weird way. It's the flawed,
we know what that feels like.
Part. I know what that feels like.
Yeah.
And so that I live in the imposter's body more than I live in my own body. And that's what I've learned to do to survive. So now in my life when things start to go well for me. For example, when you're living in COVID and you're still employed and you're like, why am I okay? Why am I okay? And these other people aren't okay. And you feel really bad about that. That's one thing. But, taking that away for now, when you get good news and you're like, when are they going to figure this out? You start to do all that talk to yourself. And that's when you get pulled into the sort of imposter syndrome, instead of really saying, I got this because I am who I am. I deserve this. I worked hard for it. And I am just who I am. I'm in the right place at the right time. There are so many reasons I don't have to feel like I don't deserve this. And that's when it really comes up for me, is that's when my imposter sort of takes over, basically saying that to me. You don't really deserve this. You didn't really work that hard for this. Or you're going to fail at this. Or
do you think that happens, or that pops up more, well, you can answer this, but when you start to succeed, you mentioned that.
Yes,
it's when you start to succeed.
I think so.
But as success becomes easier, does it feel like that is when the imposter comes in more? Is it because it's...
I'm not there yet. I mean, everything, right now, I still feel like I have to work really hard for everything. I have to work extra for everything. I still have to do 10 other things that I can't say, hey, I have a union behind me. Because I'm just breaking in right now. I mean, this is my first, I'm getting staffed on a show. It's like I'm breaking through the ceiling.
Wait, what show are you getting staffed on?
At the Netflix show that I was producing in the UK, I was working to get staffed.
Yes, tell us what it is.
It's called Fate the Winx Saga. It's a Netflix show.
Yeah.
It's the first season. So I'm writing the second season. And
congratulations.
Thank you. I'm really proud and really happy.
You should be.
I worked really hard for it, but I worked really hard for it. I mean, I blood, sweat, and tears. I had a rash for 3 months in the UK because I was so stressed out, because I was doing so much, because I was working 15-hour days in the rain. I mean, I'm willing to put in the work, but the funny thing is that when you finally do step into that, which is to your point, when it becomes easier, meaning you don't have to stand in the rain for 15 hours. You don't have to run someone's coffee. You don't have to do all of those things. It's still there. It still is there a little bit.
So how do you work with it now? So you mentioned that you know what the correct rhetoric is, right? And I use the word correct, but meaning the one that's going to be literally just, there's the negative self-talk or there's the positive self-talk, right? So there's the way that we know is going to make us feel better, but sometimes we don't buy it, right? So what do you do in that situation where the negative is rearing its ugly head and you're like, I'm sure there's moments where we lean into that, but as you've grown, what has become the thing that helps you lean more into the positive? Yeah,
I talk about it. Honestly, I share it because I feel like everybody can relate to it, honestly. And I think that's really people powerful. Need to hear that.
That alone is something to acknowledge as growth, right? Because I have friends and myself too, in my moments when I was at that point where, and there's still areas in my life that are this way, where the awareness isn't there yet, right? Where you're like, oh, I didn't know that this was something that everyone goes through. So that alone is a win. And then it's what can if I trust that, like trusting that is true, is like step one.
Yeah. I think absolutely. And I think also at the foundation, you really have to sort of stay rooted in your humility too. And that's the thing, because I think I meet a lot of people, especially in Los Angeles, as we know, people that are posturing, people that are acting like they have all their shit together. And you're like, you don't really have your shit together, and that's okay. It's okay that you don't have your shit together. It's okay that you don't believe you deserve this. It's okay.
Well, they're suffering from the same thing.
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
And they're just
they don't know how to cope.
They don't know how to cope. And I if I meet those people, if I like them, generally I like everybody, so it's good for everybody. But I try to talk in a way that's like, hey, You don't have to fake it with me. You don't have to do that, because the real work right now is to talk about it and share it, because everybody's feeling this way and people need to hear that, because that's the hope. That's the beacon of light that everybody needs. We all need that bit of light. And
yeah, we're not alone.
We're not alone. And I think that's the biggest thing that destroys the imposter a bit, because then you're just in company. You're in company with other human beings, and it's not a creation of something that's external to you. It is actually a living human being who's saying, babe, or dude, or mama, or whatever. Like, I get it. I'm with you. Like, and that I've been on the receiving end of that, and I've also given that to other people, and it's been incredibly beneficial both ways, honestly, to talk about it, which is why I was happy to receive your email, because I think it's an important thing to talk about it for everybody. It doesn't even matter what industry you're in. If you want to be better and you want to be happy and you want to pursue whatever your dream is, you have to make peace with the imposter. I think it's a critical thing to find happiness. Honestly, I do.
Oh, I love that. And I also love, you made a really, I think, important point in saying that you can be the receiver and you can coach someone else at the same time.
Yes.
And sometimes we think, well, if I'm the one having issues, how can I possibly help someone else? Which,
I don't know what I'm talking about, or I can't do this thing because I don't, but it's like, you do know what you're talking about.
Because if we're all relating, if we're all experiencing this, that means that we've all experienced it. And we've gotten through it, meaning we've come to this point in life somehow, if it's in the past.
Yeah.
So if someone is in a different moment and we're now okay, then we can then coach someone in the moment they're having, knowing that we might be there again, but at least we know what it was like to get through it, because we're not in that emotional state. It's just like comforting someone who might be crying.
Yeah.
We're not crying at this moment, so I can help you get through this particular emotion. It can feel emotional.
Yeah.
It's kind of like emotions.
To me, it's always emotional. I feel like it's always rooted in emotion.
And there's something that I learned that I thought was really interesting, that emotions always felt uncontrollable to me growing up. Like, oh, you can't control them. And there's something that just happened to you. But okay, fine. So emotions come up, etc. And from there, what if you just let them, and then they pass? They're like weather.
I think that's the thing, is everybody feels like, I felt this way. Emotions can take physical space.
They can.
And if you let them, right?
Yes.
So then that person, that imposter, becomes a physical being, and it becomes another person if you let that happen. And
like a character in your life.
Yes, absolutely. And so I think, really, there are lots of things that I do to pull myself out of that. I mean, there's this like great...
Okay, so we talk to people.
Yes.
You said talk about it. That's
talk
a great first step. So
the biggest thing.
What else? So there's lots of things you do.
So
do you have
many things.
One more step that we can offer someone who
absolutely.
might be going through this right now?
Sometimes you need to not take yourself so seriously. And I think that is, and when I say not take yourself seriously, is not to listen to the imposter, not to listen to the voice that says that you're an imposter. Because actually, for me, it's more this external thing that's almost not a spirit, but it's like an energy, that it's me talking at me. But it's the voice of it's a pastiche of voices that I've heard. My father, my grandmother, random people. So it's
not yours.
It isn't, but they've created a sense of me within me that's internalized, and then becomes externalized when I'm trying to sit down and write, or I'm going to a job and I'm like, I've never done this. I've never worked with this person before. I've never done this specific job before, as an example of like going to Hungary and working as a director's assistant or whatever. And you realize that you have what you need, but you don't always know that. So I think sometimes you really doubt that, and it becomes terrifying. And then sometimes you actually don't have what you need necessarily, but you haven't asked the right questions. You're not there yet. So sometimes what I do is I just switch it up, and I will blast some music. I will dance. I will do something something that makes me happy, that will completely free me, that I know makes me happy, and no one else has to be around. And so I do things like that. Like, I mean,
You change the energy.
I change the energy.
Just shift the moment.
I throw on my favorite. Pointer Sisters are my favorite. I love the Pointer Sisters
Nice.
until the day that I die.
Oh my God.
So I will jam that on and I will dance sometimes for hours. And
love that.
I've said to Matt before, I'm like, I feel crazy. I'm just like, I feel like that's not right. But it is, because what it does is it gets me out of that space. And what it does is it's an exercise in vanity. Sometimes I'll do it in front of a mirror.
Sometimes I do things in front of the mirror to get out of my own head.
That's right.
Too.
It's
because
not even the vanity. It's getting out of your own head.
I look a certain way in my head.
Yes, and you don't
And
look
it's
that
distorted.
way in the mirror. It's so distorted.
And sometimes I look in the mirror or take a photo.
Yeah.
This is my trick that I don't tell anyone. But sometimes I take a selfie to get out of my own head. And if anyone follows, almost everyone who listens to this follows me on Instagram, I think. So if you look at Instagram, there's a reason I take pictures the way I take them. Mm-hmm. It's an exercise for the same message that I'm trying to convey, which is to just be and to get out of your own fucking way.
Get out
right?
of your own fucking way.
Get out of your fucking
head.
way. So
get into your body.
That's why there are not as many professional photos on my Instagram. Some people, that's the only critique I get.
Yes.
If I ever ask a friend, they're like, well, I just would love to see you with more professional photos.
Yeah.
But I'm realizing that I do it on purpose for this reason, is to get out of my own way.
Yes.
And not worry so much about it having to look perfect.
Yes.
Or I'm in my head and I want to show myself what I really look like in that moment. And it's more for me.
Yeah.
To be like, hey, you don't look like the distorted, whatever you're thinking.
Yes.
This is what's actually happening right now.
Yeah.
And it takes me out of my own head, which is kind of so I love that you said that you dance in the mirror, because I really relate to that, and I don't talk about that. Because as much as I like to talk about authenticity and being transparent and everything, there's still things that I realize I don't even know that I'm like keeping to myself. And this is one of those things.
Well, because I mean, part of it is the idea is you dance like nobody's watching, so you're doing that anyway. And I think the good thing about this is that we can talk about that because we can share it with people. And I know that sometimes I've questioned it, I still do it, but knowing that other people are feeling the same way and can be expressive, and that it's permissible for you to find another way. Because I also honestly, that imposter drives me into negative behavior sometimes, and that's also okay. But I think, like you were saying, how does it show up? I mean, it shows up every day. I mean, I'll get a call and I have to do this thing, or I'll get a job offer and it's like, oh my God, I can't, I'm freaking out.
Yeah.
Like approaching my first season of actually writing. I mean, I've been in writers' rooms for the past 5 years, working as a writer's assistant, a script coordinator, and like trying to break in, and now it's finally my moment. So of course that imposter is absolutely fully 100% present. And the thing is, kind of okay with that, because there is also a reason that it's there. Sometimes, when we were talking, it is a check for me. It does push me to be better. It does force me to ask myself questions. And sometimes I listen to those questions, and sometimes I don't listen to those questions. My imposter will totally point things out and ask me things, and sometimes I listen to what it's saying. Sometimes I do, because I'm like, what? There's a reason. Maybe I haven't done the work. Maybe I'm not ready for this yet. But how? The question I ask myself is, I have a month before I enter that room. Well, before I fire up that Zoom call, I need to prepare X, Y, and Z.
And
specifically.
I think that there's a difference.
You come up with a plan.
I do think the imposter is the one that's not making all the sense. And I think that the person that's aware and is checking you and going, hey, make sure you're prepared, may come from a similar place, but I don't think it's the same thing. I think that there's
I guess what I mean is they'll get you to the same place. So it's almost like the way that I look at it, and maybe it's not, but I see it now, I try to see it more as counterpoint.
I like that.
You know what I mean? I try to look at it that way instead of saying...
Leveraging
it's not specifically my grandmother's voice. It's not specifically my father's voice. It doesn't have that It doesn't have that specificity anymore. Like I said, it's a pastiche of things. So it's this amorphous thing, but it does, I like that it's outside of me, because then I can look at it and then I can pick it apart. And then I can say, yeah, I hear you. Okay, I try to translate it into something that's actionable.
So it's useful now.
It's useful, and I can use it as a tool, in fact, and it can motivate me instead of... And then over time, that voice has changed. I mean, that voice has fused into the, you know, you got this.
Yeah.
You know, it does... It is kind of weirdly the same thing, too. It grew out of that. I mean, you know, there are people that give up, and there are people that fail. And there are people that fail multiple times and get back on the horse and are wildly successful. There's just there's no one way into this thing. And that's the other thing, I think, the big realization that's helped me sort of deactivate the negative aspects and the shadow part of the imposter is that, realizing that. So...
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's great. I like that. I think that's a really good point to make, and I hadn't thought of it that way, that this, just like everything, has a dark and a light.
Yeah. I mean, maybe you're right. I guess it's because
no, we don't.
It's a room of different kinds of energy, and that energy,
I think it evolves, and if you work with it, and you made that point again and again through our conversation, is that you've got to find ways to work with it. It's going to be there with you, very much like fear doesn't go away.
Yeah,
it's just part of our
You have to make your peace with it a little bit.
Yeah, you have to figure out how to work with it.
Yeah.
And I love that. So
you don't have to accept what it says specifically. You don't have to say, oh yeah, you're right, I'm not going to get that thing or whatever, even though, you know, that might be playing in the back of your mind. But sometimes it has things to say, and I'm open to it. I listen to it, and
I think that takes evolving with it, though.
Yes, it does.
Yeah,
for sure.
I just want to make that point.
100%. It's a process, and it is about being open and talking to people about it. If you need help, it's about getting help. I mean, I've been in therapy over lots of things, and therapy helps a lot. And honestly, just kind of continuing to show up to do the work that I love to do.
You've got to keep showing up.
Quiets that voice too and shuts it down, honestly.
I love that. Yeah, you've got to just keep doing it.
Yeah.
You're right. Action helps. And dancing is an action. Like,
yeah, exactly. Getting in your
helps.
body.
It really does.
Yeah.
So, where can people find you?
Yeah, I'm on social media. I'm pretty active. I'm on Instagram mostly.
Okay, what's your handle?
It's Greg Locklear on
Instagram.
at Greg Locklear. You know, I think for right now, you can look for my name in various shows and
we'll find you.
And I'm embedded because right now I'm not quite there yet. And I don't know if it's because of my imposter, but you know what I mean? I think, you know, for me, the joy and so much of it is just like actually just doing the work and having the experience of doing the work.
I relate to that. And this is a simple question.
Yeah.
This is just where someone can, you know, check in with you and say, hey.
I mean, you can say hey to me on Instagram for sure. I'm going to fire up on Twitter at some point. I've just been getting into trouble with my politics lately. So, but yeah, Instagram's the best way. And I'm always down to talk to people. So if anybody wants to reach out and say, hey, I understand, I liked something that I heard. I mean, I'm cool to talk about it. So
that's great. Thank you for this. This has been amazing, sitting in your brand new home in your bed drinking champagne.
Yes, thank you for the champagne, by the way.
Thank you for the cocktail we had before this.
There will be another.
You guys will understand why this conversation was a little tangential, but if you know me, that's how it goes. So thank you so much. This has been amazing.
Thank you. I love it. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to People Begin. We hope that these episodes inspire and empower you to take your next steps in your own intuitive journey towards a life or business that feels clear, authentic, and aligned. And if you're ready for more tools and guidance like courses and free events, then I'd love to invite you to my new Intuitive Creators Academy and Collective. It's free to join. Just follow the link in the show notes and remember to DM me once you get there to receive a special gift for being a listener of People Begin. I'll look forward to seeing you there.